So good afternoon, everyone in India and Asian countries, and good morning to colleagues from Europe. So it's my real pleasure to introduce Dr. Devanjan Bhomik, a young colleague from Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi, IIT Delhi. He's working as an assistant professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering. Very young, enthusiastic colleague who is working on neuromorphic computing using spintronics. About him, so Dr. Devanjan Bhomik got his BTech degree from electrical engineering from IIT Kharagpur in 2010. Then he moved to University of California, Berkeley for his PhD degree. And in 2015, he obtained his PhD degree from the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences, UC Berkeley. And during his PhD, he worked on mostly nanomagnetism and spintronics. His current research interests are artificial intelligence based on emerging devices, for example, spintronic devices, and emerging architecture, for example, in memory computing architecture and quantum architecture. So it's really very nice to have you, Devanjan, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We are really happy. I think Braj is not here, but on behalf of my team, I really welcome you and welcome you all. And just a small announcement that during the lecture, we will not take any questions. However, after the talk, we will definitely take all the questions one by one. So you may kindly write in the chat box if you have any questions, and I will come back to you after the talk. Thank you so much, Devanjan. It's all yours. I will take care of the meeting part, and yeah, you can just concentrate on the talk. Thank you.
Okay. So I assume people can see my screen, right? So I will go on. Okay. So my screen is visible, right?
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. So I'll start. Somehow this thing we can move. Okay. So hello everyone. Special thanks to Professor Subhankar Bedante for the introduction and for inviting me to give a talk in this series. So I will straight up go to the research subject that I'm going to talk about. So our group's research primarily focuses on essentially neuromorphic computing or unconventional AI and using spintronics. We do have some other work going on with purely with transistors, analog circuits, as well as some amount of quantum computing based AI, but I will not touch upon those because this is exclusively a spintronic seminar. So, and 80% of 70-80% of my group's research is actually spintronic computing based AI. So I will focus on that. Now, okay. So why do we use AI in the modern world? AI is being used almost everywhere. So you can see that some of the major achievements of AI, out of them, the top two things are more like a demonstration of how good AI can be, while the later two are the ones what we potentially has a day-to-day application. So the top one, it shows that an AI system could beat a human and a champion, not just any average human being, but rather a champion at the ancient game called Go, which is even more complex than chess. And to do that, they used a hardware of 170 GPUs at 1200 CPUs. So compared to a human brain, the amount of computing architecture that was needed or resources that was needed to beat a human being was humongous. And also there was another thing what it says that IBM Blue Gene computer with like 147,000 CPUs and 145 terabyte memory was able to simulate the cerebral cortex of the cat. So these are more like demonstrations of how good AI can be, while the more practical application people have thought about of AI is one of them is self-driving car. And if you are following this research, you will see self-driving cars already have been made and they're being tested, and soon they will be a reality. And virtual assistants are already a reality. So we have all these different companies selling virtual assistants effectively for different kind of entertainment purposes. Now, one common theme here is all the AI that I'm talking about involves fundamentally this, that AI is a much wider world, But within AI, you have different algorithms that people use, and of the different algorithms people use, neural network or deep learning is basically the most popular algorithm that is being pursued right now, right? And so, what this neural network algorithms do is essentially tries to predict a function that maps from a given set of training inputs to a given set of training outputs. So x1, x2, xn, that is your data. That can be images, that can be different signals, that can be audio signal, visual signal, and y1, y2, etc. are like your outcomes. Like if you have a lot of images, it can be the images are but the input, and say whether the images of a cat or a dog or a bus or a train, that is your like output, right? And the purpose of this neural network algorithm is to come up with some kind of mapping function which goes from the inputs to the outputs. And typically this mapping function involves multiplication of a large weight matrix given by W here with the input X, and then applying a nonlinear function on it. So both the WX multiplication, the weight input multiplication, weight matrix input vector multiplication, and the nonlinear function applying on it, these are essential for running this neural network algorithm. Now, when you try to do that for, I'm having a difficulty in changing the slide. I don't know why. Just 1 second. Somehow slide changing is becoming a bit challenging. Okay, it's going on like this. All right. So in the conventional implementation of AI, what happens is when you are coming up with this weight matrix and you are trying to map from the input to the output, you store the weight matrix in your memory, and then from the memory you bring it to the processor, and again you put it back in the memory. So this involves a lot of data shuffling between a memory unit and a computing unit, which is called the von Neumann bottleneck. And so this von Neumann bottleneck is a challenge, and hence that von Neumann bottleneck leads to slow speed in computation and a lot of energy consumption. And that is precisely why when I was showing the AI beating the human champion at Go, or the simulating the cortex of the cat, so many GPUs, so much memory were being consumed. This is because of this von Neumann bottleneck that happens. Now, as a result, people have tried to do some alternative ways of AI inspired from the architecture of the brain, as opposed to the architecture of the computer. And that is what the people call neuromorphic computing. Now, the definition of neuromorphic computing, what you mean by neuromorphic computing, is again a bit varied and varies from person to person. For some people in the community, neuromorphic computing has to be exactly or very similar to how the brain behaves, as in all the spiking signals and all. But on the other hand, for a lot of people, neuromorphic computing essentially means anything which is not the conventional von Neumann implementation of AI. So the definition of neuromorphic varies from research group to research group and community to community to a degree. So there are other words people use like non-von Neumann computing, in-memory computing, or whatever. But somehow in the spintronics community, the word neuromorphic computing is more popular. And so I will stick to the word neuromorphic computing for the title of the talk. But though sometimes I will say words like in-memory computing, non-von Neumann computing, but essentially they are variations on the same idea. So within this purview of non-von Neumann or neuromorphic or in-memory computing, there are like 3 research projects which I'm doing, which are directly related to the spintronics. The other ones are not on spintronics, so I'll not talk about them. So the 3 works that I do, the first one is domain-wide device-based implementation of a non-spiking neural network. And the second is domain-wide implementation of a spiking neural network. Difference between the two is that the inspiration from the brain, which is the essence of neuromorphic, is different at different stages in these 2 cases. So in the left one, non-spiking neural network, the inspiration from the brain is the fact that just like in the brain, the neurons are connected with each other through the synapses. Similarly, here in our architecture, the different horizontal bars and the vertical bars that you are seeing are connected through some devices which we call synapses. And that is where we are going to put our domain-wide devices. So the inspiration is just that connection at a connection level. On the right one, when I say spiking neural network, there the connection with the brain is more involved, because within the brain, you use spikes for information communication and computation. That is not the case in a regular computer. So not only are we using this mesh of neurons and synapses, like the left schematic, also in the right schematic, but we also use the spikes for information transfer here. So that's why the right figure, that is number 2, this is more inspired from the brain than the left one. And the third one is computing using spinol nano oscillators. And how is this linked to the brain? Again, this is not a conventional architecture. This is not like a regular von Neumann architecture. So again, you can call it from that way neuromorphic. And in another angle, there have been some evidence that oscillatory behavior has been found in various neurons. So again, the connection with the brain is at different levels. Some of them there is really well connected with the brain, some of them are not. But either way, it is called neuromorphic computing. You can call it neuromorphic computing. So I will start from topic 1, then I'll go to topic 2, and then go to topic 3. So in topic 1 again, as I was saying, it's like the brain, architectures are built in hardware, in artificial hardware, on chips, where you connect the horizontal bars and the vertical bars. These are all electrical bars with these blue squares, which are essentially some synapse device. Now, people have been doing this not just with spintronics, but with various other technologies. There are people doing this with RRAM. There are people doing this phase change memory. And in our group, we are doing it with domain wall synapses. And I will show why domain wall synapse can be potentially better than the more popular synapse devices at this moment, like resistive RAM or phase change memory. So why this? Again, as I was saying, in a standard neural network algorithm, you have your set of inputs, then you multiply it with a weight matrix, you get your product, weight matrix input vector multiplication product. You apply a nonlinear activation function like this tan H activation function, then you get an output. Then you compare with your desired output, and then you adjust your weights. You change your weight values. Now, this matrix multiplication can become much faster if you implement this with a crossbar array. Why? Because your input vector can be electrical signals going into the horizontal bars. Your weights can go into these blue boxes. And this multiplication happens through simply an electrical circuit with the O1 complexity, which means all the multiplications happen at the same time. And then you can apply your nonlinearity with some analog circuit, and then you get your outputs. So the processing is very, very fast. So as a result, spintronic devices can be good for this. But you have to remember one more thing. If you plan to train these weights, tune these weight values on the hardware itself, you should be able to have a very good control over the weight modulation property of these synapses. And my next few slides, the argument that I'll build is that for spin devices, you will actually have better weight control characteristic or better synaptic characteristic compared to resistive RAM and phase change memory, right? So let's see what is essentially this domain wall device idea that I'm talking about. So in a magnet, in a ferromagnet, you have certain region with magnet, the moments polarized into the plane, say vertically inward, and again the moments polarized vertically upward. So we're looking at a very special kind of system here, which is the heavy metal, could be tantalum or platinum, ferromagnet, cobalt and boron kind of system. So the peculiarities of the system are that it exhibits perpendicular magnetic anisotropy, number one. Number two, if a current flows through a heavy metal, there is a generation of spin polarized electrons inside the metal, and that injects spin momentum into the ferromagnet and can manipulate this big magnetic green arrows, which are the magnetic moments, right? And that leads to the domain wall motion and the weight modulation. Third, there is Dirichlet-Moreau interaction at the interfaces often. Here in this schematic, I show a block wall, but you can also form a Neal wall in this kind of structures. Okay. So first I will show some work from my PhD where experimentally we showed that on these devices, once you have a domain wall and you apply a current, again, these are block walls and they're moving orthogonal to the current, but there are other people with experimentally showing the domain wall can move in the current direction as well. So in my experiments, in my PhD, we showed that if you have a domain wall along the bar and you move current and you flow the current and the current flows, the current passes along the domain wall, then the domain wall can move, okay, and move orthogonal to the current direction, all right? So that is there. And now if the current flows in the other direction, the domain wall moves orthogonal to the current flow in the other direction. And corresponding to the different domain wall motions, this is being trapped by magneto-optic curd effect image, where this black portion is magnet into the plane, the no contrast portion is magnet out of the plane. And with this, what I'm saying is, now suppose I have the domain wall and there's a current flowing through the heavy metal below, and I have a tunnel junction structure. Now, tunnel junction means that if the domain wall is on one end, left end, the conductance is high because all the moments in your free layer where the domain wall is moving are in the same direction as the moments in the fixed layer. Similarly, when the domain wall is on the right side, all the moments in the free layer are anti-parallel to the moments in the fixed layer, and so the conductance is low, right? So essentially, by moving the domain wall, you can go from a low conductance to high conductance state, and again go back to the low conductance state, right? And the smoother you can control the domain wall, the smoother you can do your conductance modulation. And in my neural network, these different conductance values will be your weight. And so the smoother you can move the conductances, the better will be your weight. So the original idea, while the experimental work was done, some of it in my group and some was done in other research groups like Stuart Perkins' group and Professor Jeffrey Beach's group, the idea of using the domain wall synapse as the domain wall device as a synapse largely came from Professor Kaushik Roy's group in Purdue. But they were mainly focusing on the inference part, like running the neural network, training it in software, and then running the neural network just for the testing. While in our group, we started focusing on training the neural networks in hardware itself. And that is where the smooth domain wall motion will come into the picture very well, as I'm going to present next. So what we did here is, this is again, this is all my work done at IIT Delhi. So now instead of doing block wall, we move to Neal walls, which have a high DMI. And we showed that as the current flows to the structure, the domain wall can move along the direction of the current or opposite to the direction of the current based on the polarity of the current. And we benchmark this against some results from Geoffrey Beach's group published in PRB 2014. Right? So our model, simulation model on MuMax was experimentally benchmarked. Now what we showed here, and this is the most crucial figure, we show that because the domain wall motion is so linear, your conductance increase and decrease curve is also very, very linear. And if you apply 25 microamp of positive current to move the domain wall by a certain amount, like 10 nanometer or 20 nanometers, say, in one direction, then with a current of the same magnitude and the opposite polarity, you can move the domain wall in the opposite direction by the same amount, right? Now, what we showed next is that in a phase-change memory on an RRAM device, that is not the case. So it is because phase-change memory works by changing the phase of the material, by heating up the material, or the RRAM device works by creating oxygen vacancy in the material. These processes are not that symmetric in terms of going up and down in conductance. As in, it might be easy for me to go from an amorphous state to crystalline state, but it is not that easy for me to go back from the crystalline state to the amorphous state. Or it might be easy for me to create the oxygen filaments, but it is not easy for me to remove the oxygen filaments. But in the physics of the domain wall synapse, the domain wall can be moved in the one direction or the other very, very symmetrically. And we showed that because of that, you can train a domain wall synapse-based system consuming a much lower energy, 4 or 5 order, actually not 4 or 5, it's even more, 7 or 8 orders of magnitude lower energy than the PCM or RRAM synapse. And in terms of time also, what happens is in domain wall, you can move up or down with nanosecond pulses. While in phase-change or RRAM, you can go up in conductance with a very short pulse, but to go down in the very large magnitude and a very long reset pulse. Again, because it's not a symmetric device. So as a result, like we showed that if you want to train a crossbar array, this crisscross structure is called a crossbar array. If you want to train a crossbar array, then it is much better in the hardware itself. Then it is much better to use the domain wall synapse than the RRAM or PCM synapse. We showed this with some device simulations as well as system level simulations, which I'm going to show next, right? So how do we do? We just showed this far. So there's an important catch here that when you're working on a memory device, when you're trying to project a spintronic device as a memory element, then you essentially show your property of how much current you need to switch it and how much time you need to switch it and all that in a single device, and your path is laid out already to how to go from a single device to a full array, largely. On the other hand, in a case of neuromorphic computing or the crossbar array, this kind of stuff, this whole field is evolving so much that just showing that within a single device, my domain wall is moving very symmetrically and this is a good property is not enough. Within the community, showing device level result will never lead to ultimately useful technology in neuromorphic computing. You have to show results at a system level. This is what I personally think. So we are not only showing device level results, but we are actually extrapolating them, designing full systems with the spintronic devices, and showing system level properties of this spintronic systems, which is very, very important, at least within this field of neuromorphic computing. Just showing a device property, which often tends to be the case, is not the way I feel this whole thing can ultimately lead to a useful technology. Now, what I'm saying is this, that here so I'll shift my focus from just showing the device physics, which I focused on thus far, to how to use the device physics to a system level and show you why we got those energy numbers that we got, and I just showed you. So essentially what we have a weight matrix multiplication, then we have a nonlinear function, and then we calculate the weights, then we calculate the changes that we need in the weights, and then we accordingly update the weights. Now, if this calculation happens at a very arbitrary precision, like a 16-bit or 32-bit floating point precision, like it happens in a regular computer, it's very, very hard to design the actual analog circuit and the devices for that. So we have to modify the algorithm. So what we do, once we calculate the weight update, we quantize it. We quantize it so that the ultimate weight update that the synapse needs is just one quantum. It is either going up by a certain fixed amount or going down by a certain fixed amount or remaining where it is. So in terms of domain wall physics, that translates to this domain wall just moving at say 10 nanometer in one direction or 10 nanometer in the opposite direction, and that's it, right? Or being where it is, which means the same way. So essentially what we do is we do the device level simulation on micromagnetics. Then we take those properties from the micromagnetic simulation, we incorporate them in as Verilog A models in my Cadence Virtuoso analog simulator, and we do a system level simulation. So without the system level simulation, no matter how good your device property is, the physics at a physics or materials level, you will not be able to use it for neuromorphic computing. Because neuromorphic computing ultimately means a system level intelligence has to be created. It's not the path from a single device to the full system is not figured out here the way it is figured out for say STT-MRAM or SOT-MRAM kind of memory technologies. Right. So we do the system level simulations here, and we show that if we follow this thresholding algorithm, where the weight change is thresholded, quantized to certain values, then these are some analog circuits we have designed. I'm skipping that. We showed that we essentially have in each synapse cell, we have 2 extra transistors. Now, when this gets a weight value, the input is coming in a thresholded form, the weight value is coming in a thresholded form. This makes the multiplication simple. We can do it with a regular 2 transistors and do not need a complex circuit in each synapse cell. So this 2 transistor, 1 spintronic device synapse cell is good enough for doing training in hardware. And with that, what we show is that with this cell, now if you can see, the quantized inputs are coming, the multiplication is happening, and the current that is applied to the domain wire device is 1 quantum. Is either a 10 microamp or say negative 10 microamp, and that's moving the domain wall by say 10 nanometer or negative 10 nanometer, and the weight on the conductance are hence changing by a fixed amount. So this is what we are doing, and doing that, we design large crossbars, and actually and again, an important thing in neural network is with just one crossbar array means one layer of neural network, and with that you can do nothing when it comes to actual applications. You can show some toy applications with it, but in order to make it actually useful, you need to design lots and lots of these kind of crossbars. And we actually, at least at a simulation level, we showed that all these crossbar arrays are being designed in a particular way such that your weight changes happen the way we want, and ultimately we achieve training. And we show that in a multi-level neural network with a crossbar architecture, we get some really, really small time for training and a really small energy consumed in synapse. Again, because of the very symmetric behavior of these devices. So 2 points I wanted to, thus far whatever I talked about, 2 points I want to make it very clear. Number 1, at device level, domain wall device does show many promising physics, which is not shown by its competing technology like PCM or RRAM. And we published that work in AIP Advances, and it got the Advance in Magnetism Award last year. And so that basically is a very symmetric property of the domain wall, which is not the case with PCM or RRAM, right? So at a device level, we show a much better property of domain wall device compared to competitive technologies. But showing physics or device level is not good enough to show success at a neuromorphic computing, because even though these are all simulations, at least this is a design solution. So we have designed the system. So if anybody wants to fabricate the full array, they have to look at this kind of design solutions and the design results and accordingly fabricate the systems, right? So as a result, so this is not like the simulation at a materials level. This is rather simulation at a design of a circuits level, right? So, and here the correspondence between the what you design and get on a simulation and what you get experimentally should be, in my opinion, better than the correspondence that you typically get when you simulate things at a materials level and you do experiments at a materials level, because this is more like analog design. And since we take care of all the device properties and put them in the analog circuit, what you get largely at the circuit level from the simulation software is, we believe that typically if you fabricate, you should be getting something like that if the device properties are similar to what we are putting in the simulation, right? So using that system level, we showed that not only we can design a single layer network, but we have been able to design multiple layers of these crossbars, and we've been able to show training on different kinds of data sets following this backpropagation algorithm, which is meant for multi-layer neural network. And we show system level results and not just device level results. So that is what my take home message is from what I showed thus far. So what I show next is very similar. We still just don't do device, but we do a system level. But here, instead of just doing work at the non-spiking neural network, we are going to show results for a spiking neural network, which is closer to how the brain is, closer to how the brain behaves, because we use spikes for information transfer. So within the brain, if now, so this part, which is spiking neural network part, and this is supposed to be more more in tune with the behavior of signals within the actual human brain. So you see that this is within here, this is a neuron connected to another neuron through a synapse. Now within a neuron, when the ionic currents enter, so the potential increases, and once it crosses the threshold, a spike is released, and the spike flows, and the spike goes to the next neuron through some synapses where there is neurotransmitter release. So there is a lot of biology that goes on here. But effectively, this, for when I'm trying to emulate this kind of neural network of the brain, in terms of hardware neural network, we need models for these neurons and synapses. And the popular model for the neuron is the leak integrate fire model, where essentially, as signal enters, there's some potential which goes up, essentially is an integration. And then once it crosses the threshold, a spike is released. All right. And then when it comes to the spike time dependent, the synapse property, unlike the previous synapse property, which is just about modulating the conductance, here it's a bit tricky. What happens is, when the pre-neuron spikes and the post-neuron spikes, based on the time difference, who spiked fast, who spiked first, the weight changes. So if my post-neuron spikes right after my pre-neuron spiking, then my weight change is positive. If my weight, as shown by these blue dots, when my post-neuron spikes before the pre-neuron spikes, my weight change is negative, as shown by the red dots in this STDP curve on the bottom right. And if the spiking is very close, the two spike events are very close to each other in time, then the magnitude of the change is much higher. If they're further apart, the magnitude of the change is lower. So you can intuitively think about this and it will make sense to you. So I can go into more details at the question answer session. But what we did is, again, we designed systems where the neurons were following the leak integrate fire property. The synapses were following the spike time dependent property. And we had different kind of protocols. We did partially supervised learning, where what happened is, if some of these neurons were spiking, right? So if some of these neurons were spiking, we were trying to prevent them from spiking by applying some bias currents. While in the next case, completely unsupervised training, we're not putting any bias current to prevent the neurons, the output neurons from spiking. Rather, we added a homeostasis property, which basically showed that if the neuron spikes too much, then it stops spiking, because it becomes more difficult for spike because the threshold voltage increases. So we played around a lot with all this. A lot of this work was done earlier in some dedicated neuroscience books published here. by some other research groups. And what we showed is that with spintronic devices, you can not only do synapse, but you can do neuron, leak integrated fat neuron. Why? Because think about it. When a domain wall moves, the velocity of domain wall is proportional to the current. So the distance moved by the domain wall is that integration of the velocity over time. So essentially, if my current is in input, the distance moved by the domain wall is essentially an integration of my input over time, right? And if the domain wall moves and it goes to hits a tunnel junction, then the tunnel junction's output changes. So it basically means the output of my circuit is an integration over the input multiplied by time, thanks to the domain wall motion. So as I said, as mentioned in the abstract of the talk, domain wall not only helps in as a synapse because this is a non-volatile system, but it also helps to as an integrator. And so we designed this kind of things again in Cadence Virtuoso. This was simulated in micromagnetic software MuMax and then put in the Cadence Virtuoso, and we showed nice leaky integrate fire properties. Similarly, we also showed spectrum dependent plasticity property, and here with the domain wall synapse, you need this kind of circuit where these transistors are working in the subthreshold regime, and the spikes are coming here as the gate of the transistors, and based on the timing differences, the current flowing is exponentially changing with time because we are working at the subthreshold regime where the current is proportional to exponential of the gate voltage of the transistors, right? So as a result, we get this kind of spike time dependent plasticity property from a combination of spintronic circuit and transistor circuits. And we putting all these things together, we simulate again. We just don't do device simulations. We also do system level simulations in a group, and we get a very high accuracy for the Fisher-Sidis data set on the system. Then we try to do a lot of things with MNIST as well. The accuracy results are not very promising, which made us have less confidence in this spiking neural network models compared to the non-spiking neural network models. Now I'll come to the third part of the talk, which is working with spin oscillators, right? So as you may be aware that, most of you here probably are familiar with how a spin oscillator works. So I'm not going into it, but you must be familiar. Many of you may have read that Professor Julie Grolier's group at CNRS Tales Lab, they showed experimentally that vortex oscillators can be used for neuromorphic computing, right? So in our group, what we did was we tried to extend that work further, and we showed the similar results on simulations, not experiments, but on simulations on spin Hall oscillators. Because spin Hall oscillators have 25x lower area than vortex oscillators. So we showed that if you want to make this technology scalable, we need to move from vortex oscillator to spin Hall oscillator, and that's why the results on spin Hall oscillators become very, very important, right? So we showed here that in a spin Hall oscillator, for certain values of current, you can create uniform mode oscillation as opposed to vortex mode oscillation. So when current flows through this similar heavy metal ferromagnetic structure, because of the spin orbit torque, the moments are found to gyrate and in a uniformly. So this is uniform mode spin Hall oscillator. And we showed here in this case, the very important thing for this kind of device is that as the current density changes, the natural frequency should be tunable and should be tunable linearly. And so we choose this range of operation because this is linear. Now, the way this oscillator system works is that you have external RF magnetic fields, the frequencies of which are proportional to inputs, and your spin oscillators have to sync to this external RF fields. So we show that as my current density changes, say from 7.9 to 8.35 to 8.75 times 10 to the 11 ampere per meter square, as my current density changes, my natural frequency changes. So earlier it was about 7, now it is 6.7, now it is 6.5 gigahertz. Now, but whatever be the natural frequency and whatever be the current, around like a 10% or even lower, like 1% regime of that, actually it's like 10%, I would say, because not say 10%, less than that, 2 to 3%, around 2 to 3% range about the natural frequency. If you apply the RF field, the frequency of the oscillator is not equal to the natural frequency of the oscillator, but rather the frequency of the external RF field. So you can see here, if my RF field is beyond the 6.85 and 7.085, then my oscillator continues to oscillate at 6.96 gigahertz. But the moment my RF field is between 6.9 and 7 gigahertz, my oscillator's frequency becomes the same as the external RF frequency, which means my oscillator is now synchronized to the RF field. All right. So I can do that. And then what we show is that essentially when you, so the kind of neural network structure that I showed earlier is still there in this device, because my dimension, my input dimension. So when you do the Spinhawk oscillator, when you're trying to tune it to RF fields, there are only 2 RF fields. But my input has many dimensions. It can have 4 dimensions, which was in the IRIS dataset I showed before, or it can be like 30 dimensions, which was in the blood cancer cell dataset. But in case of images, there are each pixel is a data point, each pixel is a feature, each pixel is a x1, x2, x3, something like that. So you might have hundreds of them. So first you do some matrix transformation techniques to convert that data to a lower dimensional 2-dimensional data. Then you apply your RF magnetic fields such that the frequencies are proportional to that data, right? And then what you do is the following: those RF fields are applied on the oscillators, and you see and you try to tune the currents of these oscillators such that they sync with RF fields. Now, the moment this syncs, for different inputs belonging to different categories, your syncing between the oscillator and RF field has to be done accordingly. And if my input is of particular category, RF fields, the oscillators sync in one kind of way. If they are of a different category, oscillators sync in some other kind of way. And that is our target. And so this is what we show here. First, all these data sets, which concern breast cancer, which is essentially telling whether a blood cell is malignant or benign. IRIS dataset, which is talking about what flower is what type, and MNIST, which is about what character is it. So earlier also, whatever results I showed before, I apologize that I did not go into the details of the data sets, but typically these are the data sets on which we showed our results, and we showed that we can classify them. So neural network problems are largely about looking at the image and saying, okay, this image is of digit 0, that image is of digit 1, and so on, right? So that is what we did so far. Whenever we showed accuracy results, that was the kind of accuracy results. And so what are the accuracy results here? So here we show that first you convert the data from their higher dimension to 2 dimensions through appropriate technique, and we use the neighboring component analysis technique for that. And once we have done that, we have ultimately reduced the data to clusters within a 2-dimensional space. And then what we do is we use the Spinhorn oscillators, and we move the frequencies of the oscillators with current such that they fall in line with these clusters. So if you look at this data, because the most simple one, the WBC, you will see that the red cluster, which is the benign cluster, is falling within SHNO 1's purview, and here the SHNO 1 is synced with FA. Similarly, on this, the blue one is falling within this horizontal blue bar, and it is falling with SHNO 2's purview, and here the SHNO 2 is synced with FB. Here it gets a bit more complicated in IRIS. Here Spinhorn oscillator 1 is synced to both FA and FB, while the other 2 are synced with just one field. And in each case, we end up getting accuracy numbers which are very higher than 90%. So I'd like to summarize again that we showed 3 different techniques. So we showed 3 different techniques. So with a spiking neural network, we reported accuracy of like 95% up in the IRIS dataset. On the non-spiking neural network with a hidden layer, both on the IRIS dataset and MNIST dataset, we reported about 90. This is the best result thus far. Non-spiking neural network with domain-wide synapse gives us the best results, and we have very high accuracy results there. And finally, with the oscillator network also, we showed very high accuracy results, right? And so I would like to thank the funding agencies and DST and SERB and various internal projects in IIT and MHRD for the STARS Award. And I would like to thank Professor Vedanta and the whole, sorry, it's not WBS, it's W2S team for arranging the talk. Thank you. So I will go to some of the, say this slide and keep it here so that, and take questions from now.
Thank you so much, Devanjan, for this very nice talk. On behalf of the participants, my team, Braj and Puspendra and Shakti, we clap for your excellent talk. So it's time to take some questions. So there is one question by Chandrasekhar Munapaka. He just wrote to me, how about Walker breakdown of domain walls? Velocity is not linear with current.
Yeah, so Walker breakdown happens at a particular regime. So we have not gone into up to that regime. So once the Walker breakdown happens, then this will not work. So it's very important for us that the velocity is proportional to current. So only in that regime, the integrated thing can work. But for the other one, the non-spiking network, there it is not that important, because ultimately I am moving in the non-spiking neural network that I showed. So my screen is still visible now. So in this kind of architecture, all I need to do to change the weight is apply a current of positive magnitude and move the domain wall by a certain amount, and apply a current of the same magnitude but opposite polarity and move the domain wall in the opposite direction by the same amount. So it is that linearity is not important here. All that matters is being able to choose one current magnitude for which the domain wall moves equal distance in both directions as I reverse the polarity. But in case of the integrated property, which is here it is important to have the linearity. And so here what it's saying is right, that if there is a Walker breakdown, this is not gonna work.
Okay, I hope that answers. So there is a question from Adya Shakti Das. She's working with my group. Will the width and size of domain walls affect the spiking process? First question.
Yeah, that will, of course, that will. So we are designing our devices such that, so ultimately in the spiking process, the critical part is this timing. See, if you look at this slide, it says time between two spikes versus current, right? So so this is how it works. So you have a neuron and a DC current is going into it. Now, if a current goes into a system, the voltage goes up. Now, once the voltage hits the threshold, you have a spike, right? And then again, the voltage goes back to zero. And again, voltage goes up, and once it reaches a threshold, again it spikes. So the time difference between two spikes depends upon how fast your voltage is going up, and that depends on how fast your domain wall is moving. So of course, all these parameters are very, very important, right? Size of the domain wall, that is controlling the size of the device as well, because your domain wall has to move a certain distance to create a spike. So we take care of all these things to design our system. So more details can be found in the in our paper on this topic.
Okay, she has a second question. Please explain how the post neuron and pre-neuron spikes decides the weight calculation.
Okay, so again, I would say that this thing is important only if I do spiking neural network. This is not important if I do non-spiking neural network, which is what most machine learning and AI people do. So let's be very, very clear about these things. In machine learning community, in AI community, the largest part of it do not do all the spiking stuff. So they are not at all bothered about this post-neuron spiking and pre-neuron spiking, how the weight changes based on that. Within the AI community, a very small percentage works on spiking neural networks. And even within the spiking neural network, a lot of the people do not use this spike time dependent plasticity. So even they are not bothered about this question. But the people who are working on spike time dependent plasticity or spiking neural network, which actually coincidence or not involves a lot of spintronics people, for them this question is relevant. And so my answer is specific to that community or that algorithm only. So if you look at the picture at the bottom here, see the blue curves are for, see the spike timing difference is basically when my post neuron spiked minus when my pre-neuron spiked. This is my pre-neuron, the left one. On the right one, I have my post neuron. So when my spike time difference is positive, what does it mean? My post neuron has spiked after my pre-neuron. And you can see the weight change is positive. Similarly, when my post neuron spikes before the pre-neuron, my weight change is negative, red point. Now, what is the intuition behind this? The intuition is simply this. I want to design a network such that my pre-neuron spikes and that information is communicated to my post neuron, right? If my weight is positive, my pre will send a signal to the post. And that means the post will spike after pre. So if my post spikes after pre, that means this is a good thing. Pre is actually sending something to the post. So it's like a positive feedback. Sure, pre is sending something to the post, make it send it more, increase the weight. But if my post is spiking before pre, that means my pre is not sending my information to the post. That's then the post will spike after pre, right? So reduce that channel. So if the channel is strong, make it stronger. If the channel is weak, make it weaker. That is the idea. And that's why the weight goes down when my post spikes before pre, which is the red cluster. And if the spike times are very close to each other, that means there's a strong correlation. So make it more correlated. That's why the weight change is larger if the two spikes are very close, or rather when the timing difference is low. But when the timing difference is high, you can see it's exponential. So it goes much further down once my timing difference is much higher.
Okay, thank you. Satya Prakash Pati has a question. How stable is multi-level states in domain wall-based synapses? Are these states deterministic?
So again, the states are stable because you are working on a ferromagnetic system. So if a domain wall moves and you have a certain new magnetic configuration, unless you apply a current, the domain wall is not supposed to move further and change the state, right? So we of course have not done any stability analysis, because doing stability analysis is much easier if you actually have the physical device as opposed to doing it in simulation. Because doing it in simulation means you have to actually create that condition for all the physics of which can lead to the domain wall flip randomly has to be included, which is difficult in simulation. So from simulation, it is not a very good idea to say talk about stability. You should look at domain wall devices stability results from experimental data, and I would assume that it will be there for a long time. So because if you're trying to use it as memory, it means it is highly non-volatile, right? So stability is not an issue. Is it deterministic? Again, if you're doing it in simulation, it is very, very deterministic. If you want to do it in experimentally, all these other thermal fluctuations, defects, all these things come into the play. So I would say that I showed simulation results, but the community is progressing fast. As I talk, a lot of people, some people definitely have shown experimental results on this kind of domain wall motion. So refer to those experimental reports to see whether that is deterministic or not. From whatever I've seen, it is fairly deterministic.
Okay, thank you. Dale Atkinson has a question. Can you say something about how much device to device domain wall variability or your systems can accept and continue to function as required?
So this is a good question. I think as a person who designs systems, this is a question that we should try to answer. Now, we don't have the exact numbers yet, so it is harder for me to answer how much it will vary, how much the synapse property will vary, because that is very, very experimental. But it is easier for me to answer, given that it varies, how much can I tolerate? I should do it. We haven't done it yet, but we should do it because this question keeps coming. One thing I can say is that when it comes to the non-spiking neural network, that works largely based on negative feedback mechanism. So if you look at it, what typically happens is your domain walls do your multiplication operation here, and you accumulate your error, and you calculate some gradients and you pass them back. Okay. So the target in a non-spiking neural network typically is to minimize this error. So it is a negative feedback mechanism. So a negative feedback mechanism typically very error tolerant. So I would say my non-spiking neural network results will adjust for a lot of variability, but my spiking neural network works on positive feedback, because as I said, if my channel is strong, make it stronger. So the spiking neural network, I think variability will be a major problem. Non-spiking variability will not. Again, this is my opinion. Based on my intuition, we should do more rigorous study of this.
Okay, thank you. The question by Kelvin Fong from NUS. In the earlier works, it was found the domain wall might need to be pinned using notches in the device structure, or the domain wall might propagate after the current reduces to 0. If we move from the analog behavior to a discretized state, do we lose or gain anything at the system level?
So this is a very relevant question, and that is what we showed in our this algorithm. So this is something which has bothered us, and that we majorly focused a lot of energy on this, because first initially when we used to publish our papers, our first paper in 2018 on this topic, if we look at it, we assumed the domain wall device to be a purely analog device, and we were moving it by any amount we wanted. But as rightly said, that it is very difficult to do it that way. The way you have to do it is you have to move the domain wall by a discrete amount. So it is very important to see that if my domain wall moves by a discrete amount, and hence my weight is changed by a discrete value, do I lose anything in terms of accuracy or not? So the answer is yes and no. If I have just a single layer neural network and I do not have any discretization, versus if I have the single layer neural network and I have the discretization, suddenly you will see our accuracy drop. But if I put multiple layers in my system, then this goes down, simply because a multi-layer neural network is a better neural network than a single layer neural network. If I solve a multi-layer neural network on a computer for a particular task, it does way better than a single layer neural network, because it uses a lot of nonlinearity and I make a better system. So even if I put thresholding, even if I put discretization, a multi-layer neural network will be able to survive the onslaught of that, which a single layer neural network will not. So the answer is, again, it depends on your design. Your discretization will affect your algorithm, but you can improve your algorithm by putting multiple layers. So it's heavily dependent on the designer who is designing the system. So I would say that it is, I think I just don't have that reference. I don't know why of that paper. Yeah, so one of our recent papers published in, this one, D. Kaushik et al. Nanotechnology 2020 actually has the details where this question is answered by whatever was just now asked. Can I move this? 1 second. I have this in a bad position. Now I'm not being able to move it. 1 second. So if you look at it here, without the hidden layer, the accuracy is 15% after putting discretization. But after putting discretization and having a hidden layer, the accuracy has gone up to 100%. So the answer here is, I do lose something if I do not change the number of layers. If I change my number of layers, I can improve the accuracy. So I would request Dr. Fong to take a look at this nanotechnology paper published last year, which addresses this point.
Okay, so I see no more questions. So I thank you, and there is a small token of appreciation from our group. I will share the screen, Devanjan, if you stop.
So, okay, stop sharing.
Okay. So now we have made some token of appreciation for all the speakers, and we will send the plaques to the previous speakers. For today, I'm very pleased to read the plaque for you. Can you see my screen, Devanjan?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, so W2S seminar, webinar series on spintronics, NISER Bhubaneswar, India. Takes pleasure in presenting the plaque to Dr. Devanjan Bhowmik, Department of Electrical Engineering, IIT Delhi, India, in recognition and appreciation for being a valuable speaker to give a lecture on neuromorphic computing using spintronics. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed your lecture. I think we have a large number of participants from Asia and Europe, Professor Matthias Chloe, Professor Dale Atkinson, Karin Everset from
I would like to thank everyone for attending the thing, and I hope that this opens up a lot of questions. So please send me an email or ask Professor Vedanta to contact, share my email address and contact details so that we can answer further. I can answer further questions and maybe collaborate in future based on today's conversations.
Yes, and many others like Professor Sarosh Das, Professor Prem Piramanian, and many others. So I'm really happy to to have you for this event. And I'm requesting on Thursday, we are going to have the lecture of Professor Albert Ford at 5 p.m. Indian time. That would be 1:30 p.m. Central European time. I request you to join the event because that day we'll celebrate our 1 year successful completion of W2S seminars and the lecture, of course, of Professor Albert Ford. Thank you so much. Please stay safe and see you this week on Thursday, 5 p.m. Thank you, Devanjan. Take care. Bye-bye.